Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the speech that my colleague from Trois-Rivières gave previously. And Mr. Speaker, I appreciate that they're not to suggest that the presence or absence of any members, but I would hope that all members take this very, very seriously, because what we are talking about here is at the very foundation the need to be able to trust in our democratic institutions. Now, at committee the other day, I had the opportunity to talk a little bit about the importance of that process when it comes to the ballot, the election, and how every vote, the necessity of making sure that as every Canadian has that opportunity during a general election to go into that voting booth and mark a ballot, that it is essential that there be trust in every step of that process, Mr. Speaker. And likewise, I would suggest that just as important as the necessity of ensuring that our democratic infrastructure is held strong and true, and there's been some of those things called into question. I know some of the allegations, and more than just allegations, but instances where there has been election interference, including the communist dictatorship in Beijing, pressuring members of the Chinese diaspora in Canada to vote a certain direction, and how essential it is to ensure that we do everything we can to protect our democracy. Likewise in this place, you know, when the role of the Speaker was first contemplated in the 1300s in the United Kingdom, in the early years of the establishment of what we now know as Westminster democracy, there was a deep understanding of the need to ensure that there was a moderating voice, that there could be parley, that ability for discussions to take place. For it was the establishment, and why the carpets are still green in the People's House of Commons, that we could have discussions and debate as opposed to simply fighting wars. And the reason why the Speaker plays such an important role in that process is that their responsibility is to facilitate that. And the reason why I talk about trust when it comes to ballots and in a general election, and how that is essential for each and every Canadian who has that opportunity to cast a ballot, is by extension that is passed on to this place. And the reason for that is that each and every member, as a member of Parliament, has to be able to trust the institution. Now, I know that each and every one of us, we have to navigate the circumstances to where there's politics and partisanship, while also ensuring that we serve each and every constituent. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I would just make a note that when it comes to the first past the post system, of which I've been very vocal in support of that because of its simplicity and its legacy within the Westminster system. But, Mr. Speaker, I've never asked, when a constituent walks through my office door, I've never asked who they voted for. The expectation is that I will serve them, their needs, help them with casework. Now, we may not always agree. In fact, there are many instances where I don't agree with different individuals across my constituency, but never once would I put at risk that sacred obligation that I have to serve all of the people that I represent. And when the discussion surrounding the establishment of a more formal role as Speaker, there was the acknowledgement that there had to be that moderating presence within the House of Commons, within Parliament, to ensure that debates could take place. For if there was not that moderating presence that could be trusted by both those who had the ability to make a change and those who would make up what we now know as the opposition. So government and opposition, although it wasn't quite as formalized in those early days, and quite often ended up being that presence that pushed against not necessarily a government in the sense of a political party having won an election, but rather the direction that the Crown was moving the country. There had to be that voice that could be trusted by all. And there are instances throughout the history of the Westminster system where that has not always been the case, but we've been able to build on that history to the point where it highlights how important the role that chair occupant, that Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the occupant of that chair plays. And it's not just in terms of the debate. That's a big part of it, and that's what people see. And for all of us in this place, that makes up a significant portion of the time, and to which Canadians get to know MPs from, whether it be from question period, whether it be from debates, or whether it be the symbols that are associated with this. But, Mr. Speaker, the foundation of it is trust. And my suggestion to you, in what has been unprecedented, the number of times where the privileges of members have been violated, and I've not yet had the opportunity to look into the specifics in terms of amount of time, but there have been many questions of privilege that have been raised in this current Parliament that call into question many things. And I'll get to the correlation, the troubling correlation that I see with that to the leadership that is attempting to guide our country right now. But we see how the individual that sits in the chair as Speaker, that sacred trust is being called into question. And it's not for dislike of the individual, and I know many of us will have fights about policy and about differences of opinion. In fact, I get so frustrated when quite often I will hear my Liberal and NDP colleagues, they'll say, well, they're doing what's best for Canada. Anybody that opposes them is wrong or is un-Canadian or something to that effect. And Mr. Speaker, that's not only insulting as a representative of the people of Battle River Crowfoot, as a parliamentarian, but it speaks to how we have to ensure that we take so seriously the obligation that we have as members of Parliament. There's been a series of examples, and if this was the first instance, you know, a beginner's mistake, I would understand that. And I would hope that many others would take seriously the need to allow someone to grow in the role. But, Speaker, I am so concerned that this is a trend that seems to have been continued over the course of the last number of months. And further to that point, these are the public instances where we are seeing a lack of impartiality. And I know I've heard from constituents that have called that into question in other instances that have not necessarily made media attention. But, Mr. Speaker, part of the sacred trust that is required for the chair occupant is that we have to, as parliamentarians, every parliamentarian needs to be able to trust that it's not only the words that are said while the Speaker takes his place in the throne at the front of Parliament, but it is every decision that the Speaker makes in the undertaking of those duties. And many of the questions associated with that, whether that be the fact that there were questions asked by the Speaker's Chief of Staff to the Clerk to clear this prior to, there was questions asked about whether or not this would be appropriate. There's been a host of other concerns that have been raised in terms of whether or not that partisanship can happen. We have the erosion of the ability for this for MPs to be able to trust that the decisions that the Speaker is making are in fact impartial and ultimately serve the interests of the institutions, which is what best serves, full stop, what best serves the interests of parliamentarians and ultimately Canadians. But, Mr. Speaker, I would conclude with this. One of the concerns that I certainly highlighted in the discussion after the previous Speaker's resignation, of which there didn't seem to be many Liberals running to the previous Speaker's defense, who was taken to court by that Prime Minister. But we see excuses being made. We see people quick to jump to defense and say, oh, it's sorted, but it's not my fault. Mr. Speaker, I would suggest this, that this Prime Minister and the leadership that he has presided over the course of the last 9 or so years has led to an erosion of trust in the very foundation of our democratic institutions. And as a result, I would suggest that we have to all take it upon ourselves to so diligently rebuild that trust that has been broken. Because if we do not, Mr. Speaker, my fear is that so many Canadians will stop seeing themselves represented in the benches of those who take their seats in this place. And that, Mr. Speaker, would be an absolute travesty. We need to take this issue seriously. We need to ensure that we restore trust and ultimately to ensure that the Speaker is able to operate in an impartial manner. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like for people to do some contrast here. Imagine, if you will, you have the opposition House Leader being the Speaker of the Parliament, and he actually attends a Conservative fundraiser. What did the Conservative members back then say? Not a word. Zero. Now you have the Speaker of the Parliament, where the Liberal Party of Canada, take a look at what was said. The Liberal Party of Canada admits they made the mistake, not the Speaker. They fully apologized, and you get Conservatives demanding that that Speaker be censored and kicked out of office. The question I have for members is, why are they questioning this particular Speaker, but they weren't prepared to question the ethical misjudgments of their current House Leader when he was a Speaker, Mr. Speaker? A lot of people would be very suspicious as to why the Conservatives are really doing this.
The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that that member, and it's unfortunate that there aren't more Liberals that are seized with this debate, because I suspect that their opinion is like mine to many within the benches of the opposition that have seen how this troubling erosion of trust, and the reason I can tell you that confidently, Mr. Speaker, is because I hear increasingly, actually, from constituents of Liberal members that say that they have lost trust in the ability for the government to listen to their people. Now, there's a member out there heckling saying that she doubts it, and I believe that there's even an email in my inbox that would say that is from the city of Waterloo. So, Mr. Speaker, my suggestion to all Liberal MPs is this: do they care about power first, or the institutions to which we should all serve? And when it comes to the issue that we are debating here today, Mr. Speaker, as the old saying goes, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And Mr. Speaker, I think that we have seen this pattern repeated time and time again, and it's too bad that the Liberals seem so desperate to hang on to power that they refuse to acknowledge how their attempts are eroding trust in the very institutions and ultimately Canadians that we serve.
Question commentaire, questions and comments. The honourable member for Abbotsford.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for his thoughtful speech. And he referred to this tawdry situation as being unprecedented, and he's so right. This is unprecedented in Canadian history, that a speaker would face a prima facie case of violation of privileges of this House, not once, not twice, but 3 times in a short period of months. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to him is, given the fact that there have been so many speakers in the past that in many cases have served for many years and that have never had this kind of a case brought forward, isn't it shocking to find that this is the 3rd time it has taken place with the current occupant of the chair, and shocking that this Liberal government and the Liberal members of this House and their NDP coalition partners will not call the Speaker on this and finally agree to fire him?
The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question that my colleague from Abbotsford asked. And I would look back. You know, we had how the beginning of this Parliament and the previous Parliament, the Speaker was even taken to court by the Prime Minister and the government for upholding the needed impartiality of that chair. We have the 42nd Parliament. There were not these questions asked during the 42nd Parliament, of which a few, although the Liberal Party was the 3rd party at the time, way in the back corner, they didn't have questions about impartiality during Stephen Harper's majority government. And then the 3 minority parliaments prior to that, where there was a Liberal Speaker presiding over 2 Conservative minority parliaments and a Liberal minority parliament, they didn't have these questions about the impartiality. Speaker, I emphasize again, and I implore all of my colleagues, especially those from the Liberals and those from the Liberal benches, but specifically those from the New Democrat benches, that for the sake of our institutions, Mr. Speaker, let's make sure that the chair occupant that you are sitting in is able to conduct themselves in a way that is truly impartial for the sake of our institutions and for all Canadians.